For 10 years, I carried his company like a second spine. Late nights, impossible clients, and targets no one but me could hit. The promotion he promised became the rumor that kept me loyal until the day he smiled across a glass table and said the word restructure. In one meeting, my future vanished and my badge deactivated. They thought they'd ended my story, but that was only the ignition. He didn't even look at me when it happened. His eyes were locked on Tyler, the rookie with barely 2 years under his belt, as he said the words that detonated 10 years of my life. Congratulations on the promotion. The room erupted in applause, hollow and scripted, while my pulse thundered in my ears. For a decade, I had been the one holding this company together, patching deals at midnight, winning back furious clients with nothing but grit, carrying revenue targets that would have buried anyone else. The corner office had been dangled like a prize for years, always just next quarter, always after this launch. And now, in one meeting, my chair had been slid across the table to someone who once asked me how to merge cells in Excel. My face didn't move. Inside, something fractured. Later, in the glass-walled conference room where humiliation could be viewed like theater, my boss Evan used words polished enough for an HR manual: restructuring, realignment, skills mismatch. What he meant was simple: I was disposable. He pushed a folder toward me containing an NDA and a severance check that looked like a tip after a bad meal. "You'll be happier elsewhere," he said, his eyes already drifting to his phone. 10 years, gone with the flick of a sentence. I should have screamed. I should have begged. Instead, I smiled faintly, signed nothing, and walked out. Past rows of coworkers who stared harder at their screens. Past Tyler, who grinned like a kid who'd been handed candy he didn't earn. In the elevator, I let my hands tremble once, just once, then buried the weakness. When the doors opened, the fear calcified into something stronger. They thought they had erased me. They had just given me motive. Outside, the rain came down in sheets, soaking my jacket, but I barely noticed. My phone was already buzzing like a live wire. 3 messages in 10 minutes. "Why is your email bouncing? Are you still on our account? We need to talk." Clients. The ones who trusted me, not Evan. And then, the call that changed everything. A CFO from our biggest account, voice rough from the wind, saying, "Please tell me this isn't true." I ducked into the corner coffee shop where I'd once written pitch decks at dawn, ordered the strongest espresso they could brew, and spread my notebook across the table like a war map. 10 years of knowledge wasn't theirs, it was mine. I listed it all: performance reviews that called me indispensable, pipeline forecasts only I could interpret, vendor reps who would answer me at 2 a.m., but ignore Tyler at noon. Then I circled the fuse: the product launch scheduled in 8 days, a $40 million bet balanced on fragile integrations, one slip away from a public disaster. Evan didn't understand the risks. Tyler couldn't even spell them. If I stepped back, the launch would collapse. But collapse was messy. I didn't want chaos. I wanted precision. Controlled demolition. The CFO called back, his tone sharpened. "If Tyler runs this, we're dead. Tell me what you know." I told him about the API rate limits Evan ignored, the missing contingency plan for our linchpin client, the shortcut in the integration that would buckle under real load. Silence, then a low whistle. "And you can fix this?" My laugh was dry. "I built it. Of course I can fix it. But not as their employee. Not under their NDA." He didn't hesitate. "Then consult. Quietly. I'll push paperwork through procurement today. Keep us alive." I glanced at the severance folder still in my bag, untouched. They wanted me gone? Fine. I'd be gone in the way that mattered on paper. But in reality, I'd be the one holding their house of cards together. That night, my apartment transformed into a war room. Sticky notes lined the walls, timelines sprawled across my desk, and my phone buzzed with allies slipping into orbit. Cass from product whispered on the line, "Tell me you're free." The 2 account execs I'd carried through 3 layoffs said, "We're with you." Loyalty wasn't dead, it had just shifted sides. Meanwhile, Tyler blasted an all-staff email thanking Evan for trusting him with launch, attaching a spreadsheet he barely understood. He thought he was leading. In truth, the people who mattered already knew who held the real keys. By midnight, I had secured my first domino, a quiet agreement from the vendor to expand throughput for 72 hours, no invoice until Monday. That meant when Tyler pushed the Go Live button, the system wouldn't choke. He looked like a hero. But the CFO, Cass, Rena, Miles, they'd know whose fingerprints were on the rescue. Credit didn't matter. Leverage did. At 2 a.m., my phone lit with Evan's number. I let it ring. He wanted obedience. What he would get was silence. By dawn, the sky bruised purple, I poured another coffee and stared at my notes. 8 days until launch. 8 days until they learned what it meant to fire the person holding their empire together. And I already knew how I'd make sure they never forgot. An email drafted and waiting, scheduled for 1 minute before their triumphant success webinar. Subject line: what really kept your launch alive? For now, I closed the laptop and let the city wake up, my pulse steady. The war had just begun. The next morning, my inbox, well, the personal one they hadn't deactivated, was a battlefield of opportunity and danger. 3 clients who had read between the lines of Tyler's clumsy leadership announcement were already reaching out, their emails tinted with panic. We're reconsidering renewal if you're not here. One even wrote, "We signed because of you, not them." It was tempting to hit reply with 3 words, "I still am." But timing was everything. If I revealed myself too soon, Evan would weaponize the NDA I hadn't signed yet, dragging me into a war of lawyers instead of letting his own hubris destroy him. So I played ghost. Cass kept me updated from inside the beast, her messages short and surgical. Tyler doesn't know what an SOW is. Evan's ignoring the API issue, says vendors will flex. Linchpin client furious. They noticed the missing backup plan. Each update was a knife twist, but also confirmation that my strategy was working. The more silent I stayed, the more visible their incompetence became. By midweek, the first cracks spread into headlines. An industry blog leaked that the launch date was aggressive and unstable, citing an anonymous source, Cass, no doubt, who had mastered the art of weaponized truth. Evan doubled down, issuing a memo so full of buzzwords it read like satire: synergy alignment, value maximization, risk managed through proactive optimism. I laughed out loud at my kitchen table because optimism doesn't raise throughput or fix broken integrations. Meanwhile, Tyler tried to lead an all-hands, and halfway through, his screen froze because he'd overloaded his own laptop with 30 open tabs. Rena texted me a photo, the chat window filled with jokes the moment he dropped. The employees weren't loyal to him. They were waiting, watching, wondering how long the charade could last. Still, I couldn't rely on schadenfreude alone. I needed to secure my next move. That came when the CFO, true to his word, pushed through the quiet consultancy paperwork. 1 page, no frills, just enough legality to let me operate in the shadows. I signed it, scanned it back, and in that moment, a decade of servitude shifted into independence. No badge, no manager, no corporate cage. Just me, my expertise, and the truth. That night, I built my command center. 2 monitors glowed with dashboards, sticky notes lined my walls in grids of yellow and red, and my phone buzzed with incoming updates like pulse beats. Cass and the A's were my eyes inside. I was the brain outside. Together, we made a system more efficient than any org chart Evan had ever drawn. But then came the first real test, the linchpin client, the one account that made or broke quarterly targets, requested a call with the real lead. Tyler, oblivious, accepted. Cass whispered, "He doesn't even know their COO's name." Panic rippled through me, because if that call collapsed, the whole company would unravel too quickly. I wasn't ready. I needed their collapse to happen at the right time, not as a sudden implosion. So I made a choice. 10 minutes before the call, I emailed the COO from my new domain, Hale and Company. Advisory, introducing myself as an independent consultant. The subject line, ensuring stability for launch. The reply came in 2 minutes flat, join the call. And so I did, camera off, voice steady, disguised as vendor support. Tyler stumbled through his opening, misnaming the client's product, and then I slid in. If I may, we've secured elevated throughput and delayed the public webinar by 48 hours to integrate your requested features. Silence. Then the CEO's voice, calm but firm. That's what I needed to hear. The call ended with Tyler smiling like he'd just pulled off a miracle. He had no idea his miracle had my fingerprints all over it. That night, I sat in the glow of my monitors, pulse racing. The rush wasn't revenge, it was freedom. For years, I had been the hidden engine. Now I was still the engine, but the mask had dropped. I controlled the timing, the clients, the truth. Evan thought he'd cut me off. Instead, he'd set me loose. Then came the twist I didn't expect. At 11:47 p.m., Evan himself called. Against my better judgment, I answered, curiosity winning. His voice was tight, almost desperate. I hear you've been talking to people. My laugh was cold. People talk to me, Evan. That's the difference. He blustered about legal exposure, proprietary knowledge, disloyalty. I cut him off. The NDA? I never signed it. Silence. I could almost hear him calculating. If you come back, he said finally, I'll double your salary. You'll report to Tyler, but we'll find you a new title. My grip on the phone tightened, fury rising. After a decade of carrying his empire, my reward was servitude to the man who replaced me. Keep your empire, I said, voice sharp as glass. I'm building my own. And I hung up. The next morning, I woke to another storm. The blog had run a second piece, this time naming Evan directly. Words like negligence, instability, risk to shareholders painted across headlines. Shares dipped 2% before lunch. By afternoon, clients were calling Cass directly, bypassing account managers. She forwarded me the transcripts and my name kept coming up. Where's she? Is she advising? We trust her, not them. It was like oxygen. Proof that my decade of invisible labor hadn't vanished. Proof that loyalty, once earned, couldn't be reassigned by a memo. As night fell, I scheduled a draft email, the one I'd been crafting in my head since the moment the elevator doors closed behind me. It would go to every major client 1 minute before the launch webinar, what kept your launch alive. Inside, the truth. Not gossip, not vengeance, just the documented steps we had taken to keep their systems from imploding, signed with my new name and my new company. A manifesto of competence. A shot across the bow. 7 days remained. 7 days until the launch that could either bury them or crown me. As I closed my laptop, I whispered the words that had been growing louder each day. I don't need their empire. I'll build my own and take their clients with me. Day 7 bled into day 4 in a blur of quiet interventions and louder consequences. I was the phantom switching tracks while the train conductor waved to the crowd, and the closer we got to launch, the more the rails hummed with heat. Cass fed me updates like oxygen. Tyler had promised a feature that only existed in a slide. The legal team had rubber-stamped a liability clause without noticing the data retention pitfall. The linchpin client wanted proof we could handle a 5x traffic spike at noon Eastern on launch day. I'd already solved the spike. Vendor throughput lifted, undocumented and reversible, but the data clause made my stomach clench. If they pushed with that clause live, one bad export could turn our celebration into discovery. I drafted a patch note, ghost wrote a clarification for legal, and sent it to the CFO from my Hail and Company domain with 3 bullets and 1 promise. Sign this, or you're building a headline for me. He signed within the hour. The emotional whiplash was constant. At 10 a.m. I was giddy because the load test held. By 10:12 I was cold because an industry reporter DM'd to ask if concerns about leadership stability were true. I wrote back the only kind of truth that doesn't break you in court. Customers will have what they were promised. Behind the scenes, I kept moving pieces like a stagehand nobody applauds. I coached Rena through a renewal pitch for a customer who loved me and distrusted everyone else. I gave Miles the talk track that would keep a CEO from blowing up in front of his board. I sent Cass a midnight video walking through the integration risk only a person who had failed at 3 a.m. once in her life could spot. Each little rescue bought me leverage, and leverage was the only currency I wanted now. Evan, smelling smoke and calling it fog, doubled down with theater. He scheduled a company-wide countdown, all hands for the day before launch, complete with a hype reel cut from stock footage and a script that said family 5 times in 3 minutes. He introduced Tyler as the future, and I watched the recording later, pausing at the exact second Tyler's eyes slid toward Cass for approval he didn't get. That should have been satisfying. It wasn't. Satisfaction would come later, the precise satisfaction of a lock clicking when the tumblers align. That alignment came from an unexpected direction, a board member I had met twice in 10 years, the kind of woman who gave advice with her eyebrows, reached out from a personal account. If you have concerns, now is the time. Off the record. I stared at the screen a long time because lines like that can be both parachute and trap. Then I sent her a single page. For bullet points, 6 receipts. No adjectives. She replied with 2 words, understood. Watching. My pulse steadied. If the board was watching, my timing mattered even more. On day 3, the universe tried to take timing away. At 2:41 p.m., the vendor quietly rolled a security patch that changed an endpoint we depended on, the kind of minor update that eats launches for breakfast. Tyler didn't notice. Evan couldn't. Cass pinged me with a 3-word text, data drift now. I felt the old reflex, the one where I sprint into the building with a bucket, and for one hot second I hated that I still had it. Then I used it on my terms. I pulled a maintenance window lever none of them knew existed, one we'd negotiated years ago and never documented publicly, and bought us a 2-hour freeze while I rewired the call, tested the fallback, and wrote Tyler a script that made it sound like his idea. When the system came back, green lights bloomed across the dashboard like a breath returning to a chest. Rena sent me a string of fireworks emojis. I allowed myself half a smile before the next punch landed, an email blast from Evan claiming milestone achieved, CCNG customers and press with a promise that would be true only if Fairy Tales paid API invoices. I drafted, then deleted, 3 replies that would feel good and harm me. Instead, I opened my scheduled send, the launch -1 minute email to our enterprise customers and tightened 2 lines so they cut cleaner. Here is exactly what we did to keep your data safe. Here is exactly what we refused to do to make a headline. I added a P.S. that tasted like steel. If you ever want your launches run by adults, Hale and Company is open for business. The first visible break in Evan's facade came from where I'd aimed, the linchpin client. Their COO asked for a final confidence check call with leadership and insisted on inviting vendor support again. I joined as a shadow square, camera off, mic muted until needed. Tyler started strong on the script I'd written, then veered into improvisation, promising a 24-hour migration window we could hit only if we sacrificed data integrity. I unmuted. That's not our plan, I said calmly, and the COO, bless him, replied without missing a beat. Good, because if anyone touches our telemetry, we're done here. Evan tried to wrest control with what he called charisma and what customers called talking over them. I led him back by asking a question that only someone who knew the guts could ask. Shall we walk through the retry semantics at the shard level? Silence. Then the COO laughed once, short and kind, and said, I see the adult is here. After the call, Tyler messaged Cass to ask what retry semantics meant. Cass messaged me, I almost feel bad. Almost. I didn't. Not anymore. With 48 hours left, I finally did the thing I'd postponed because it felt like admitting a dream. I built my company's homepage. Plain white, black letters, one promise at the top. We tell the truth when it's expensive, and a contact form that went to an inbox I hadn't named out loud yet, founder at Halley & Co. I sent the link to exactly 3 people, the CFO, the board member with the eyebrows, and the COO who'd called me an adult. No blast. No bragging. Just a door with the hinge oiled. Minutes later, the COO replied, after you get us through Friday, we should talk retainer. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. It was awe and a little grief for the years I'd tried to get that sentence under someone else's logo. Then Evan made his largest mistake. He tried to steal a scene from my playbook. He announced a public beta invite for a feature we could not safely deliver, directly contradicting the guardrails we'd set. It was theater to pump the share price. It was also the kind of move that gets people fired when regulators get bored. The CFO pinged me at 1:06 a.m. Text only, "Can we block this?" I stared at the ceiling fan carving the dark and realized the only way to stop it without burning down the house was to force Evan to tell the truth on camera. So I built a truth he couldn't swallow and couldn't spit, a demo environment that would throw an obvious, harmless, impossible-to-ignore error if he claimed the beta was live. The error message read like a mirror feature intentionally paused pending compliance review, and I wired it so that only an admin with the right key, not Evan, not Tyler, could remove it. Then I gave that key to the CFO and the board member and went to bed for 3 hours that felt like an apology to my body. Launch day -1. The air in the city felt charged, as if the buildings themselves held a breath. Evan's countdown all hands played like a commercial in my headphones while I double-checked the fail-safes. He said the word family again. He thanked Tyler by name. He didn't say mine. He never would. The chat window bloomed with confetti emojis and skeptical eye rolls in equal measure. When it ended, the board member sent me a screenshot of her calendar. Emergency board session, 8 a.m. tomorrow. 2 words under it, join? Off record. I stared, then typed back, "I'll bring receipts." My scheduled email waited in another window, subject line honed, links rehearsed, timing set for 9:59 a.m., 1 minute before the webinar that would crown a king who hadn't held a hammer in his life. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was the calm before a storm I had measured down to the second. That night, I walked to the river and let the cold bite my cheeks until the anger flushed out and only purpose remained. 10 years of carrying other people's pride had ended in a glass box and a folder. Tomorrow would end differently, not with shouting, but with proof. Not with revenge, but with consequence. I went home, checked the dominoes one last time, and set 2 alarms, one for the board's private call, one for the public celebration. If everything held, the error message would force Evan to admit the beta wasn't live, my email would land in the right inboxes before the spin, and the person the market believed saved the launch would be the person who actually did. I turned off the lights, lay in the dark, and smiled at a thought that felt like a promise. By noon tomorrow, I wouldn't need their company to validate me, because their customers would. Launch day dawned sharp and brittle, the kind of morning where the air itself feels wired with anticipation, and I woke before my alarms, heart already beating to the rhythm of the countdown. At 8 a.m., I dialed into the board's emergency session, muted and unnamed, my camera off while they dissected Evan's reckless promises. The CFO cleared his throat like a man about to testify and walked them through the compliance landmine Evan had planted with his phantom beta. Then he dropped the hammer. "We're alive today because of external support. Support Evan terminated 10 days ago." Silence. Then the board member with the sharp eyebrows spoke. "Support has receipts?" That was my cue. I unmuted, my name flashing for the first time in their log, and began. 10 years of memos, redlined contracts, risk logs, screenshots, each one a nail in Evan's carefully painted coffin. I didn't embellish, didn't gloat. I simply told the truth, the kind of truth that eats spin for breakfast. When I finished, the chair cleared his throat. "We'll reconvene," he said flatly. Translation: Evan's clock was ticking. At 9:59 a.m. While Evan and Tyler hyped up employees and clients in a webinar full of stock music and forced grins, my scheduled email detonated in inboxes across the enterprise world. Subject line: "What kept your launch alive?" Body: a clean checklist of the steps we had taken to protect their data, keep their throughput stable, and delay the webinar strategically, signed with my name and my new company, Hale and Company. Advisory: the P.S. was the blade. We tell the truth when it's expensive. I pictured inboxes pinging open in boardrooms, in C-suites, in home offices where decision-makers sipped coffee and frowned at the contrast between my calm competence and Evan's desperate showmanship. And then came the moment I'd built for. At exactly 10:03 a.m., Evan tried to demo the phantom beta he'd bragged about. He clicked, smiled, opened the screen share, and froze. Across every viewer's monitor bloomed the error message I had crafted. Feature intentionally paused pending compliance review. Gasps in the chat, camera feeds flickering with raised eyebrows, Tyler's forced grin collapsing as Evan stammered. He tried to recover, calling it a planned staging measure, but the words rang hollow. Customers don't forgive lies once the curtain is pulled. Questions flooded the Q&A. Why weren't we told? Who approved this? Evan's smile cracked, his voice tightened, and for the first time in a decade, I saw the mask slip from the man who thought he could erase me. By noon, the board had yanked him off stage under the polite excuse of technical difficulties. Tyler, deer-eyed and sweating, tried to keep the show alive, but it was too late. My email had already been forwarded dozens of times, replies trickling in. Let's talk retainer. We trust you more than them. Call me after this circus ends. Cass texted me one line that made me laugh harder than I had in weeks. Your ghost just stole the show. I spent the afternoon not in celebration, but in silence, watching the fallout unfold like dominoes I'd lined up months before without knowing it. Headlines shifted from bold launch to company faces compliance questions. Internal Slack screenshots leaked, employees venting about leadership failure. By dusk, Evan's name was trending on industry feeds, not with admiration but with incredulity. And in my inbox, contracts waited like unopened gifts. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had fired me to disappear quietly, to vanish into another job and leave my decade erased. Instead, I had reappeared larger than life, not with revenge in the form of sabotage, but with proof, with competence, with truth that shone so bright it burned through every shadow they tried to cast. And the best part? I didn't need to knock on anyone's door. The doors were swinging open for me. By the time the sun set on launch day, the company I had once bled for was no longer mine, and that was exactly the point. Evan's name was already being whispered in the past tense, the board scrambling to frame his resignation as planned, while Tyler, poor Tyler, was left clutching a crown that had turned to ash before it even touched his head. Meanwhile, my inbox pulsed with life. Contracts. Retainer offers. Invitations to confidential discussions. The linchpin client, the one whose renewal could sway a quarter, signed with me before dinner. A 6-month advisory agreement that guaranteed both stability for them and credibility for me. Cass resigned that night, sending me a screenshot of her exit email with the caption, "See you Monday?" Rena and Miles followed, their loyalty no longer chained by a paycheck. And just like that, Hale and Company wasn't a sketch on a notepad anymore. It was breathing. It was real. The days that followed felt like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight. For years, my worth had been measured by Evan's approval, his breadcrumbs of praise, his shifting promises of a promotion that never came. Now my worth was measured in signatures on contracts, in clients who said things like, "We trust you more than the brand." My phone, once a leash, became a weapon. Each call was a reminder that the relationships I had nurtured belonged not to the company, but to me. They always had. Evan tried one last gambit. A letter from legal, full of bluster about intellectual property and non-compete obligations. I read it twice, then laughed. The NDA? And signed. The non-compete? Expired last year. And the property? Knowledge in my head, not theirs to own. I sent back a single sentence through my attorney, "Truth is not proprietary." I never heard from them again. The first week, I worked from my apartment, walls still plastered with sticky notes, coffee mugs stacking like trophies. By the second, we had an office, small, bright, one floor above a bakery that made mornings smell like cinnamon. By the third, our name appeared on industry chatter, Hale and Company, the consultancy that saved the launch they couldn't admit was sinking. And by the fourth, clients weren't asking if I was available, they were asking how soon. One night, I sat alone in that office, the city lights glowing through the window, and let myself remember. The glass conference room where Evan told me I was misaligned. The way Tyler smiled when he took what was meant for me. The rain that fell the day I walked out with nothing but clarity. And then I thought of the board members' 2 words understood. Watching. And the CEO's calm voice, "The adult is here." They weren't just lines in the past, they were proof. Proof that when you stop begging for recognition from those who profit off your silence, the world outside starts to listen. The moral wasn't revenge, not really. Revenge had been the spark, but it wasn't the fire. The fire was truth. The fire was the simple, unshakable fact that loyalty without respect is a trap, and silence in the face of injustice only feeds it. Walking away had felt like a loss. In reality, it was the only way to win. I didn't destroy their company. They did that themselves, with arrogance and lies and the belief that I was expendable. All I did was step aside and let the truth do its work. And in that space, I built something stronger. So when people ask me now how I survived being fired after 10 years, I tell them this: I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. And in rebuilding, I proved the one lesson Evan never understood: empires don't belong to the loudest man in the room. They belong to the people who hold them up. And when those people walk away, the empire falls.